Welcome aboard, friends. What is this zone? I thought you knew. Well, take a look, mates, and welcome to Zone Possibility. Today on the Comic Book Report, Undiscovered Country, Volume 3, Possibility. Stick around and check it out. Ahoy there, everyone. My name is Dominic, and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I am going back into the world of Undiscovered Country yet again to review Volume 3, Possibility. If you've been a frequent watcher of my channel lately, you'll know that I've really taken a liking to this series. So how does Volume 3 measure up? Well, we'll have to see in today's review. But before we dive in, just a quick shout out for our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, I highly recommend you check them out. You can even use my code, TheComicBookReport, at checkout to receive $2 off of your order. Please note, if you use my affiliate code or links to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support our channel. Thank you for considering. Now let's get started with today's review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Scott Snyder and Charles Soule, and illustrated primarily by Giuseppe Camuncoli and Leonardo Marcello Grassi. The comics in this volume were published by Image Comics beginning in 2021. The volume itself collects Undiscovered Country, issues 13 through 18. And finally, this trade paperback collection comes in at 168 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at today's trade paperback collection from Image Comics. As far as the design aesthetic, it is very similar to the Volume 1 and Volume 2 that I have reviewed on the channel previously. It's a standard size trade paperback with a glued binding and glossy print paper stock. Overall, a pretty standard collection here, no complaints from me. Still a lot of red, white, and blue as far as the art direction for America, and we got a nice nautical theme on the cover this time. Of course, you have the back cover as well. We have a nice little blurb about this edition, along with a couple quotes from different sources. Nothing too crazy here. I would have loved to see a little bit more art on the back of this, but still really well made. And now just a really fast look at that glued binding I talked about. Very standard for a lot of trade paperback collections I've seen. No complaints from me. And now that we've finished our look at that, it's finally time to jump into the collection proper. And right from the jump, I'll just say that typically the Undiscovered Country videos on this channel don't perform extraordinarily well. However, this is just a series I've really come to enjoy, and I'd love to see more people pick it up and start reading. And I've heard from a few of you in the comments that you've enjoyed these reviews, and that was enough for me to go ahead and put out another one for this Volume 3. So this volume does pick up directly after the events of Volume 2, Unity, and as they fled that portion of the spiral, that section of this closed-off United States, they find themselves aboard a pirate ship and setting sail through Zone Possibility. Now, this is a really interesting fantasy-scape. One of the things I like about this series, in case you haven't watched some of my previous videos, it's basically in a dystopian future where America has been walled off from the rest of the world with a complete communications blackout for several years. The only exception being an invitation for the main characters, the ensemble of this book, to come to their country in hopes of finding a cure for this pandemic that has ravaged the rest of the known world. When our crew gets there, however, they find that America has changed drastically from that which was walled off years ago. The country has been broken down into all of these subsections or zones that have kind of a dominating aspect or core value that they believe is inherent in America, and these communities have kind of decayed or become corrupted or skewed into something they were never meant to be, and the only hope that this crew has to make it out is to walk the spiral, which is what they call going zone by zone all the way until they reach the center kind of capital of the country. Each trade paperback collection is a major story arc that covers one of these zones so far. So this is Zone Possibility, and this is where we pick up the story. And essentially, Zone Possibility is kind of on the open sea. There's a bunch of little islands that make up Zone Possibility, and the essential story here is that this is where a lot of the creatives went within America at the time, with the idea that this is where all the artists could really flourish, create their music and shows and writings that would just inspire the nation, really focusing on those core values and storytelling kind of ideals that made America so great in many ways. But what has happened here is that Zone Possibility also had access to these things called creation engines, so that the artists could basically create whatever their minds could conceive of. This, of course, led to the birth of some of the folkloric Americana sort of figures like Paul Bunyan, and even fictitious versions of people like George Washington and things like that. It's a really interesting idea in place, but essentially what has happened is after the creatives kind of created all of these people and characters, brought them to life, brought new things to life, new musics, things like that. For a while, Zone Possibility absolutely flourished with all this creativity, but eventually there was need for new and fresher masterpieces, great songs, great works of fiction. But eventually all of the people of Possibility died out, so that the only remaining things in Possibility are these creations, which themselves cannot create. So this whole region has become like totally corrupted. They're starting to go a bit mad. Like there's this whole collection of superhero kind of icons from this version of America that have no real plot or person to save, so they've kind of just gone a little wild and crazy. And this is kind of the zone where our characters show up. And I would say overall, this storyline really focuses on the character of Valentina and Ace, which are characters that we've seen in the previous volumes, but they really get the spotlight here. We have Valentina, who grew up loving comic books and all of these creative things, who has kind of outgrown some of those ideas, but thrown into this zone, kind of has to refresh and go back to some of those memories, and it really stirs up a lot about her childhood. We also have Ace, who is kind of tasked with creating a masterpiece, being told that that is the only way to escape this zone and to continue to walk the spiral. Throughout the issues, though, it really goes sideways. We have Valentina sort of captured by all these superheroes she loved growing up that have gone, again, off the deep end, and they try to launch kind of a rescue mission to save her, while Ace kind of, well, frankly, does whatever he can to create some kind of artistic masterpiece. As the storyline progresses, we have Valentina becoming sort of a supervillain to stop all of those rogue superheroes, essentially saving herself right as her unneeded rescue party arrives. The group kind of comes back together. We're led to believe that there is a bit of a romantic subplot between Valentina and Ace, which was a lot of fun for this series. There were a lot of great flashbacks, which I found to be such an asset for this volume. Very, very fun. As the issues progress, we find the main villain in this collection to actually be this kind of crossroads demon from American folklore, who has kind of had a lot of these folkloric characters held under his sway. They're basically trying to make an uprising, kind of enslave these people to keep creating for them and essentially turn their zone into a paradise once again. We have, of course, our merry band trying to stop this creature. The whole team aboard this ship ends up on this one island where it's heavily based around music, and we have Ace putting his hand into this creator machine to try to, again, create this masterpiece that will essentially save the day. At this point, the Crossroads Demon and all of the other characters sort of launch an attack against Ace and the rest of the crew, and there's like a pretty intense battle that occurs. Ace kind of generates help in his own way. And it's a really fun, just kind of back and forth battle. They ultimately are able to get out of the zone after Valentina and Ace share a kiss. I don't know if the implication is that that's really the masterpiece and the most beautiful work of art. I do kind of like that if that's what they're going for. It's a little cheesy, but it worked for me. Honestly, I think it was really earned throughout this collection, especially with the flashbacks and the character development we had from these two. At any rate, they're starting to transition into the next zone when they're confronted by the Destiny Man, who unmasks himself and is revealed to be the sibling of the Graves siblings. Basically, this is sort of a fun twist that connects two of the main characters to like the main villain of this series we've seen so far. Regardless of whether or not that was a twist I felt I needed, I do like that they put more agency into the Destiny Man. I do feel like he was pigeonholed in at the very last minute. The real big bad of this volume was that Crossroads demon, so it was kind of refreshing to get a different villain than just the Destiny Man in the series so far, but I guess you can't have a volume without him, so they stuck him right at the end, and as they're transitioning into the next zone, they all kind of get separated and some kind of weird error occurs. And the whole collection basically ends talking about the next zone, which sounds like Disunity. If that's a zone or if that's just what the next collection is, not really sure there, but that's really where it ends, kind of on a cliffhanger again. But it was a really fun volume, and that's pretty much the narration for this volume. There was a lot more here, twists and turns and sort of character dynamics, but that's really your broad overview of these issues. Switching from the narrative to the actual art in this book, it is from Camuncoli and Grassi again, so the art is very, very consistent to the previous volume, which I like to see. You know, the character models by now are really recognizable, everyone's starting to have their own fit, and I think one of my favorite things about this series is that it is a really big science fiction fantasy series, and because of that, the world building is such an incredible part of the series so far. One of the things I like the most is that each of these zones are kind of like their own microcosm in their own world. You know, the first volume really had to do with the zone Destiny, which was like this barren desert wasteland or endless frontier. After that, we had zone Unity, which was kind of this technological, super advanced sort of hub city. And now we have Possibility, which is this kind of open sea surrounded by all of these little islands. So it is really a different world with each volume. I will say that overall, this kind of piratey island adventure kind of idea wasn't as captivating as I was hoping it would be for this series. I much prefer the world we got in Unity, the kind of hyper-futuristic technological society. Really, really cool. I think for me, that really spoke to me a little bit more than this adventure here, but this was still fun. I think in the way that Unity or Volume 2 was really about a look forward, this volume and this zone was really a reflection on the past. A lot of the kind of core American figures and music and kind of art that are so ingrained into the patchwork foundation of this country. All of that was really on display here. And I think having the characters themselves have a ton of flashbacks, it really just served the overall feel and kind of themes of this collection as a whole. And I did like that. I think it was fun to have a little bit of a look back after that future Flash and Unity. But I think it did disengage me a little bit. I don't know if the transition from Volume 2 to Volume 3 was just a bit stark for me, but at the end of the day, it was still a really fun piece of world building that really just expands the scope of this series yet again. I am really curious to see where the next volume goes. I'm really hoping it's a little bit of an uptick. I do think that overall Volume 3 for me was probably the weakest in this series so far. I still enjoyed it, but I think that I am more curious to where it goes now, more than ever before. I'm finally starting to really invest in some of these characters, though I will admit that of this large ensemble, I'm still struggling to know their names. I have a much better grasp for the character models and the faces, rather than each individual name of these characters. But I do think having these collections focus on different characters throughout the arcs will help me to gradually learn the names and feel even more plugged into all of the characters and their happenings. As far as the extras go, we actually have a surprising handful at the end of this trade paperback, which I love to see. I think in general, these collections have done a pretty good job. We have a lot of great sketches and character models, a couple different variant cover art pieces, and a couple different sort of expositional, timeliney kind of information drops that, again, just kind of help fill out the lore and this whole world they've created. Really, really fun. I think with trade paperbacks, you don't always expect to see a handful of extras, but we definitely got a generous amount on this volume, and again, I was just really happy to see it. It fleshes out the world, and we get a little bit of a peek behind the curtain on the production of this book. Really, really fun. Overall, this is still a series I'm going to continue to follow into Volume 4 and likely beyond, but this volume didn't really strike me maybe quite as much as the previous ones. Overall, though, still a really fun series. I'm really loving all of this from Snyder and Soule. Obviously, I've been a huge Snyder fan since Batman, and I really like Charles Soule on Daredevil and some of his work on Darth Vader. Really a series I'm going to continue to follow. And you can see, of course, my Volume 3 along with my 2 previous volumes I reviewed, and now all that's left is to give this book a grade. for an interesting dystopian spin on some of the most iconic American folkloric characters. Undiscovered Country Volume 3 Possibility earns a B- from the Comic Book Report. I do think that this was a fun chapter in the lives of these characters, albeit not the most captivating one. I think that the subject matter itself is still really rich and there's a ton of story left to tell, but this particular entry was not a highlight for me. I did love having a new villain in this series, but I think overall this felt like a little bit of a diversion along the way of a grander story to be told. The art was consistently strong, and I did have a good time exploring more of this ensemble cast of characters. I definitely will continue my read in this journey, but I do hope to see a bit more of an uptick in Volume 4. But let me know what you think. Let me know if you're reading Undiscovered Country. I'd love to get your feedback and thoughts, particularly if you're a reader or you're considering checking this out. And until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to leave your like on the way out and maybe check out one of my other videos. Have a good one.